I never thought my own sister would be the one to erase me. Not a stranger, not an enemy. My own flesh and blood standing on that stage, thanking everyone but the person who kept her lights on, her rent paid, her dreams alive. It was our graduation day. I'd worked 4 years, 2 jobs, no holidays, just to help her finish. I even bought her the shoes she wore when she walked across that stage, but instead of gratitude, I got silence. Instead of a seat, I stood behind the crowd, forgotten. They thought I'd stay quiet. They were wrong. What you're about to hear isn't a story. It's a reckoning. Stay with me. And if you've ever felt invisible to the people you loved most, you're not alone. I was 24 years old when I realized I'd been disappearing slowly for years, not all at once. Not dramatically, just quietly like steam fading off a mirror, bit by bit, until I couldn't see myself anymore. Growing up, I was the older sister who didn't ask for much. I didn't throw tantrums. I didn't skip school. I didn't need rescuing. My parents said I was easy, but easy just meant invisible. When Brianna came along 2 years after me, everything shifted. She was loud, delicate, constantly needing something, and somehow, she always got it. New clothes, attention, praise. My mother used to joke, Rachel's the strong one, Brianna's the star. I used to smile when she said that. I don't anymore. We grew up in a modest 2-bedroom house in suburban Pennsylvania. Our town wasn't big, just strip malls, gas stations, and a community college off Route 15. Our parents worked hard, mom as a dental assistant, dad fixing HVAC systems. They weren't cruel, they weren't abusive, but they had a way of showing love that didn't leave room for nuance. If you sparkled, they loved you louder, and Brianna sparkled. By the time I was 16, I was already picking up part-time shifts at the diner near the bus station. I saved every tip in a jar labeled freedom. But when Brianna turned 14 and wanted to join dance classes, guess whose savings paid for them when she needed braces? I gave up prom. When she needed a MacBook for school, I handed over my own still warm from writing scholarship essays. Every time I gave something up, they said the same thing. It's just for now. You'll have your time. I waited for my time. I was always good at school. Numbers made sense to me, unlike people. I loved tutoring other kids, especially the ones who felt dumb. Helping someone understand something for the first time, that lit me up. So I pursued education. I got into the university 5 towns over. Not Ivy League, not flashy, but mine. I enrolled in their teaching program. Got a job assisting professors during the day and waitressed 3 nights a week. I lived tight dollar store groceries, thrift store clothes, no vacations. And when Brianna got into the same university 2 years later, I let her move into my tiny off-campus apartment. I didn't think twice. I bought the bunk bed off Craigslist. I gave her the side with more light. I cooked. I cleaned. I reminded her to drink water. She called me Mom 2.0 and laughed. I laughed too, but it stung more than I let on. By her sophomore year, Brianna had nearly 500,000 followers on social media. She posted beauty hauls, daily outfits, college girl hacks. She never mentioned me, not in videos, not in captions, not even when people asked who filmed her. She started getting free products, brand deals, sometimes a few $100s a week just to wear a jacket in a photo. When she got her first check, she said, "Let's go out." My treat. She bought dinner that night, one dinner. And then it went back to normal, me covering the rest. Groceries, rent, Wi-Fi, her late fees, her missed phone bill. I still had her name under emergency contact. Senior year came fast. I was exhausted. I'd taken on another tutoring job to stay ahead. Some nights, I fell asleep in my work clothes, my hands cracked from cheap dish soap, but graduation was coming. And I told myself, just a little longer. I pictured us in caps and gowns, hugging. I pictured our parents, finally looking at me like they did at her, but I should have known better. 3 weeks before graduation, I found out Brianna had been selected as the student speaker for the commencement ceremony. She didn't tell me directly. I overheard her on the phone, telling someone. They said my story was so inspiring. Small town girl makes it big. I remember thinking, What story is she telling later that night? I asked her if she was nervous. She shrugged and said, "Not really." "I'm just going to thank Mom and Dad and a few people from my dorm." My heart slowed. I said, "You're not going to mention, the people who helped get you here." She looked at me like I was asking for a kidney. I mean, it's just 5 minutes. Rach, I can't list everyone. That night, I went into the bathroom, turned on the faucet, and cried silently into a towel. I didn't want her to hear. I don't know why I still cared that much. I told myself it didn't matter, that I didn't need a public thank you to validate the thousands of dollars and hours I'd poured into her. But it wasn't about the thank you. It was about being seen. Even once. The week of graduation. Our parents came into town. They stayed in a hotel. I offered to make dinner. But Mom said, "Oh, don't worry about us. We're taking Brianna out for sushi. I wasn't invited." Again. Brianna got her nails done, bought a new white dress, and posted, "Can't wait to walk that stage for you, Mom and Dad." I showed up to the auditorium on graduation day in a borrowed cap and gown. I'd ironed it myself. I wore shoes with worn soles, and the dress underneath was from a thrift store rack labeled clearance. When I got to the seating area, an usher asked for my name, Rachel Taylor. He scanned the list, looked confused. "Sorry, there's no seat under that name." I blinked. "I'm one of the graduates." He checked again. "You might be standing in the back." Then, some last-minute additions didn't make the cut. My parents sat in the front row. I stood in the back of the auditorium, just behind a pillar, as Brianna took the stage in heels I'd paid for, lashes I'd bought, and a confidence built on the back of my sacrifices. She started crying halfway through her speech, said something about grit and gratitude, thanked our parents, thanked her roommates, and thanked her village. She never said my name. People clapped. Some even stood. I didn't move. My hands were shaking, but not from anger. From clarity. It was over. The waiting, the hoping, the silent giving. They'd made it clear. They didn't see me, but I was about to make sure they couldn't ignore me again. The applause was still echoing as I stepped outside. The sky was overcast, heavy like my chest. People poured out of the auditorium in clusters, laughing, hugging, taking pictures. Someone handed Brianna a bouquet the size of a toddler. She posed, smiling wide, her arms wrapped around our parents like a perfectly edited postcard. I stood at a distance, just near enough to hear my mother say, "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. You did it." No one turned to look for me. I could have walked up. I could have smiled, inserted myself, asked to take a photo too, but I didn't want to beg for space in my own story. So I turned away, walked to the bus stop, and waited. It took 45 minutes for the next one to arrive. I didn't have the energy to call a rideshare. I didn't want to answer questions from a driver who'd ask, "Did you graduate today?" I couldn't lie, and the truth hurt too much to say out loud. When I got home, the apartment was spotless. I'd spent the night before mopping floors, organizing the fridge, setting out a card for Brianna that read, "I'm proud of you. Always." I'd taped it to the mirror above her desk, next to the curling iron I fixed with duct tape after she dropped it. She never said thank you. And when I glanced at her desk now, the card was gone. Probably tossed, or stuffed in a drawer, never to be opened. I changed into sweats and reheated leftover soup. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring blankly at my phone. Nothing from Mom, nothing from Dad, nothing from Brianna. But a few minutes later, my screen lit up Maya. Maya had been my closest friend since freshman year. We bonded over long study nights, bad coffee, and being the quiet ones in rooms full of noise. She wasn't flashy, didn't care for cliques or campus gossip. She just saw people, really saw them. The message said, "You okay?" I recorded the speech, sending it now. I watched the video with the volume low. The whole thing was under 5 minutes. But it felt like a novel, except I wasn't in it. My name, my sacrifices, my years of holding everything together weren't part of her story. I was erased, edited out like I never existed. I didn't cry this time. I just sat very still. I replayed it again, slower, watching Brianna smile, watching the crowd stand, watching my mother dab her eyes with a napkin like she was watching a Hallmark movie. And then I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I opened the Notes app on my phone and began to type. At first, it was just words, fragments, memories, pieces of me I hadn't given space to in years. You asked me to drop out once to save rent. You cried over a broken phone screen I paid to fix. You never asked if I was okay, not once. The sentences kept coming, like they'd been waiting at the edge of my throat for years. They weren't pretty, but they were true. I didn't know if I'd ever read them out loud. I just needed to see them written, to remind myself that I had lived all of it, that I hadn't imagined the pain. Around midnight, Brianna came home. The front door creaked. Her heels clicked across the hardwood like punctuation marks. She was humming something under her breath, a song I didn't recognize. She didn't notice me sitting in the dark. "Oh," she said when she finally did. "Didn't see you there." I nodded. "How was dinner?" She shrugged, dropped her purse on the counter. "Nice. Mom and Dad are staying at the Marriott. They'll probably take me to brunch tomorrow." I stared at her, waited, hoped stupidly that maybe she'd say something, anything. Instead, she opened the fridge and frowned. "We're out of oat milk." That was it. The next morning, I woke up early. The apartment was quiet. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a folder in front of me. Inside were years of receipts, literal and emotional. Rent invoices, tuition statements, PayPal logs, handwritten calendars where I tracked Brianna's appointments and deadlines. I'd kept them all not out of pettiness, but because I was the kind of person who documented things, I liked order, proof, and now I had it. I didn't know what I was going to do with the folder yet, but holding it made me feel less erased. Later that afternoon, my roommate Jordan got home. She blinked when she saw me surrounded by papers. "You okay?" she asked gently. "I'm not sure," I said, "but I'm thinking about writing something." Jordan nodded. She didn't press. That's what I appreciated about her. She didn't ask me to explain things I wasn't ready to say. I told her what happened, not the short version, the full thing, from the years of secondhand clothes to the rent payments to the missing name on the seating list. She listened, really listened. And when I finished, she said something I'll never forget. "You've been carrying her future on your back for years. Maybe it's time to put her down." That night, I reopened the document on my laptop. I changed the title from Notes to My Turn. I rewrote my words not as a list of grievances, but as a narrative, my story. One where I wasn't the side character or the selfless sister or the backup plan. One where I had a voice. I didn't know if anyone would ever hear it. I didn't care. This wasn't for them anymore. It was for me. For the version of Rachel who had waited too long to be acknowledged. For the little girl who sat quietly in her bedroom while her sister unwrapped another gift labeled, "To the beautiful one." For the teenager who gave up college visits to babysit. For the woman who stood in the back of an auditorium while her own family clapped for someone else's lie. I typed until my fingers ached, and when I finally stopped, I exhaled for the first time in days. I had nothing left to prove, but maybe, just maybe, I had something left to say. The day after graduation. I woke up to the sound of my phone vibrating across the nightstand. I blinked against the early sunlight, rubbed my eyes, and reached for it. 5 missed calls from my mother, 1 voicemail, and a text from Brianna. "Hey, they need help with brunch details. You free to come by?" I stared at the screen for a moment, then set it down. There was no "sorry I didn't thank you yesterday." No, I know that must have hurt. Just an invitation to serve, again, like nothing had happened, like I hadn't stood in the back of a room full of strangers, listening to my own family pretend I didn't exist. I listened to the voicemail next, my mom's voice, tight and chipper. "Rachel, sweetheart, so proud of you too. I know yesterday was a lot. We're having brunch at the Grange at 11, dress nice, okay? Lots of photos. Love you." She said "so proud of you too," as if I had received even a whisper of recognition. The Grange was one of those rustic-looking places with overpriced French toast and white tablecloths. I'd been there twice. Once when my dad won a local business award. The second time, When Brianna turned 21, I thought about not going. I thought about staying home, letting them enjoy their curated fantasy without the inconvenient reminder that I existed. But then I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who always waited for the door to open, for the phone to ring, for someone to say, "You matter." So I showered, I dressed, I walked the half-mile to the Grange in shoes that pinched, and when I arrived, they were already seated. I spotted them through the front window, Mom laughing, Dad scrolling his phone, Brianna posing for a selfie with a mimosa in hand. The hostess greeted me with a forced smile. "Do you have a reservation? I'm with the Taylor party." She checked the list. Name Rachel Taylor. She blinked. "I don't see a Rachel here, but there is a table for 5. Would that be you?" 5. Mom, Dad, Brianna, her boyfriend, and probably Brianna's roommate who made an appearance in every family gathering lately. I nodded slowly. "They're right there," I said, pointing. "Oh, of course. Let me get you a chair." I followed her to the table. The extra chair had to be brought in from the bar area. As she wedged it between the wall and the table corner, my mother looked up. "Oh, Rachel, you made it. We didn't think you were coming." "I wasn't sure I was invited," I said, keeping my voice even. Brianna giggled. "You're so dramatic." Her boyfriend, Tyler, gave me a brief nod, then returned to his eggs. I hadn't seen him since he borrowed my car without asking and brought it back on empty. They handed me a menu. It was too warm, the space too tight. No one moved over to make room. "We were just talking about Brianna's speech," my dad said, his voice proud and booming. Got the whole room choked up. I took a sip of water. "Yeah. She definitely made an impression. She's always been good with words," Mom said. "So natural. She's a communicator." I forced a small smile. "She got an offer from that influencer agency." Brianna chimed in. "They want to sponsor my next series." "That's incredible." My mom beamed. "It's everything we hoped for you." Everything they hoped for her. I looked down at my hands, the knuckles dry from detergent, fingernails short, unpolished, no camera crew following me around, no brunches in my honor. The waiter arrived to take our orders. I ordered oatmeal. It was the cheapest thing on the menu. No one noticed. As we waited for the food, my mom began passing her phone around, showing photos from graduation. "This one's going on the wall," she said, holding up a shot of Brianna holding her diploma between our parents, all of them glowing. "Our graduate. Send that one to Aunt Margie," Dad said, "and your cousin Stephanie. She always said Brianna had star power." Still no mention of me. No photo with me in it. I looked up, the edges of my vision tightening, like the room was shrinking around me. "I'm proud of her too," I said quietly. "But I graduated yesterday." "Right, I earned honors. I finished top 5% in my department." They paused. My mother blinked, confused. "Of course we know, honey, you didn't want to fuss." I let that hang in the air. "Actually," I said, "I wanted to be acknowledged." My voice didn't shake. It rang, low and even. Brianna set her fork down. "God, Rachel, are you really doing this now, doing what I asked?" Telling the truth, my father sighed. The way he did when the football game was interrupted. I paid her tuition. I continued, her rent, her groceries. When she failed 2 classes sophomore year, I paid for summer school. I worked nights, weekends, gave up my own plans so she wouldn't fall behind. "Rachel," my mom whispered, suddenly aware of nearby tables. "Not here." "Why not?" I said. "You had no problem celebrating her in front of strangers. Why not me?" Brianna stood up. "This is pathetic." She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door. Tyler followed. Silence fell over the table. I pulled a folder from my bag, the one I'd carried all week. I slid it across the table to my mother. "What's this?" she asked. "Proof," I said. "In case you ever doubt how I spent the last 4 years. She opened it. A receipt peeked out Brianna's tuition from the bursar's office, signed under my name. I'm not asking for applause. I added, "Just truth." I stood up, adjusted my coat, and turned to my father. For years, I thought if I gave enough, You'd finally see me. But now I know you didn't want to." He looked up at me. I don't know if it was guilt or confusion in his eyes. Maybe both. Maybe neither. "I won't beg for space anymore," I said. "I've earned it, whether you give it or not." And then I left. I didn't take my half-eaten oatmeal. I didn't ask them to follow. I stepped into the chilly spring air, alone, but not empty. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else to name my worth. I had already written it down, and I was just getting started. When I got back to the apartment, the folder was lighter. I left it on that table like a parting gift, not a confrontation, a record. For once, I didn't leave quietly, but I also didn't scream. I had nothing left to yell about. I had said the truth, out loud, and it didn't destroy me. That was something. The apartment was empty. Brianna hadn't come back yet. Neither had the tension. It stayed with me, sitting like a weight between my shoulders. Even as I changed into an old hoodie and curled up on the couch, I stared at the ceiling for a while, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator, the occasional car passing outside. I hadn't slept well in weeks, but my body refused to relax. My mind kept playing the scene at the restaurant over and over again. I should have done that years ago. I opened my laptop. The file titled My Turn was still there. It had grown since I first started typing. Now almost 20 pages. Not a diary, not a rant. It was my voice, organized and sharpened. I'd started writing it for myself. But now I wasn't so sure. Maybe it wasn't just mine anymore. A message from Liam popped up on my screen. Saw Brianna's speech circulating online. She's trending on TikTok. "You okay?" Liam and I had gone to high school together. He always sat behind me in history class, drawing maps while the teacher lectured. We hadn't been close then, but we'd reconnected during my junior year when he covered a campus story about low-income students navigating financial aid. I'd agreed to be interviewed anonymously back then, but this wasn't anonymous anymore, I replied. "Not really, but I'm writing something." He responded immediately. "Want to talk about it? I'm working on a piece about student debt and invisible labor. Might be a good fit." My hands hesitated over the keys. A week ago, I would have said no. I would have smiled and said thanks, but I'm fine. Even if I was breaking on the inside, but now I had already stood up once. The world didn't end. Maybe I could stand again. "Let's meet. I'll bring the files." We met 2 days later at a cafe just off campus. It was quiet, with chipped mugs and mismatched chairs, the kind of place where you didn't have to pretend. I handed him the folder. He didn't open it right away. He just listened. I told him everything. The late payments, the borrowed textbooks, the nights I stayed up editing Brianna's videos while she slept. Because her brand mattered more than my exhaustion. I told him about the speech, the empty seat, the brunch. He didn't interrupt. Not once. When I was done, he sat back and nodded. "I think a lot of people need to hear this," he said. I looked down. "I don't want to shame her. I just want to be real. You are." We agreed he'd write a story, not a hit piece, not a takedown. Just the truth. Anonymous for now. But with quotes from me, my words, my side. It would run online in the university paper and possibly get picked up by local outlets. A quiet ripple, not viral, but real. Afterward. I walked back slowly. The spring air smelled like rain and pavement. I passed a bookstore and went inside. I hadn't bought a book for pleasure in years. Every dollar had gone to bills. But today, I let myself splurge. $12 on a paperback about women learning to speak again after silence. It felt like holding permission. When I returned, the apartment door was open. Brianna stood in the living room staring at the now empty table. "You really brought the receipts," she said, not looking at me. I didn't answer. I placed the book on the counter. "You humiliated me," she said next. I turned to her, calm, "No." I clarified. She scoffed, brushing her hair behind her ear. "Do you know how many people are talking about that restaurant scene? Tyler's mom saw a post about it. She's furious." I raised my eyebrows. "Funny." "No one's asked if I'm okay." Her face twisted. For a second, I saw the little girl inside her, the one who always needed saving, but I wasn't her savior anymore. I never asked you to do all that, she said quietly. No, I said, you didn't. But you benefited from every single choice I made. Silence stretched. I'm tired. Brianna, I added, tired of carrying everyone else and then being blamed when I put the weight down. Her eyes glistened, but she didn't speak. I walked to my room, shut the door, and leaned against it. My chest was shaking, not from fear, but from release. I hadn't burned a bridge. I'd simply stepped off of it. The next morning, I saw Liam's article had gone live. The headline read, "The Invisible Sister, One Student's Unseen Journey Through Sacrifice and Silence." I clicked. There I was. Not by name, but by truth. My story, my quotes, the details no one ever bothered to ask about. The comments section filled quickly. Some students shared their own experiences. Others said it sounded familiar, like a version of someone they knew. Some called it brave. Some called it heartbreaking. One girl wrote, "She just described my entire life. I thought I was the only one. I wasn't." Later that day, my advisor emailed me, said the dean had seen the piece. They wanted to nominate me for a Campus Resilience Award, something usually reserved for alumni who'd overcome major life hardship. I almost laughed. I hadn't thought of myself as resilient, just tired. But maybe the two weren't so different. That afternoon, I went to the mirror in the hallway and took down the old photo of me and Brianna in high school, back when everything still felt possible. I slipped it into a drawer, not out of anger, out of clarity. I had spent years trying to fit inside someone else's frame, but I was finally writing my own. And for the first time, it had my name on it, that week. Something shifted inside me. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even joyful. It was something quieter, more stable, like finally stepping on solid ground after years of trying to balance on ice. I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way people expected. I wasn't plotting revenge or hoping for some grand apology that would never come. I just wanted my life back, myself back. I began cleaning the apartment differently, not tidying like a caretaker, but clearing space for me. I boxed up old notebooks I'd kept for Brianna's assignments, threw out expired makeup samples she'd left on every shelf, and folded my laundry, first for once. I didn't touch her things. I didn't leave notes. I just carved out corners that were mine again. One morning, I found myself pulling down a shoebox from the top of my closet. It had been there for years, taped shut, labeled in my own handwriting, "Keep for later." I opened it on the floor, knees crossed, sunlight slicing across the carpet. Inside were small things that once meant everything. A yellowed receipt for the first tuition deposit I ever made for Brianna. Not me. An envelope with a letter she wrote on her 16th birthday. "Rach, I know I'm a lot, but you're my anchor. Promise me you'll never leave me." I'd kept it for so long, not because I believed in it, but because I needed to. A dried-up mascara tube I'd bought her when she cried about not feeling pretty enough. A crumpled movie stub from the night I skipped a study session to take her out after a breakup. So many artifacts of a love that had been loud on her end when she needed me, but silent when I did. I didn't burn anything. I didn't cry. I simply sorted through it with a kind of quiet reverence, like visiting a grave I'd already made peace with. When I finished, I packed the box again tighter this time and slid it under my bed, not to forget, just to stop living from it. Later that afternoon, Jordan came home with iced coffee and a grin. "You're famous," she said, tossing the newspaper on the counter. There, on the front page of the campus print edition, was the headline again, "The Invisible Sister." Beneath it, a photo of me from a scholarship award 2 years ago. I didn't even know that photo existed. In it, I'm holding a certificate, standing off to the side while another student shakes hands with the dean. I looked small. But now I saw it differently. I wasn't small. I was just standing alone. I ran my fingers across the grainy paper. Liam's editor picked it up for a state feature. Jordan said, "You'll probably get calls." I wasn't sure how I felt about that. Exposure made me uneasy. For so long, I'd lived in the background, But now the spotlight wasn't about glamour, it was about truth. My story wasn't shiny, but it was real. And apparently, it echoed louder than I'd expected. The next day, I received an email from a professor I barely knew. Rachel, I read the article. I had no idea what you were carrying all this time. If you're open to it, I'd like to nominate you for the Legacy Educator Fellowship. It's competitive, but I believe in your story. More than that, I believe in your future. I read the message 3 times before I believed it was real. That night, I opened my turn again. But this time, I wasn't writing from pain. I was writing from memory, mapping out what I'd survived, what I'd learned, and what I wanted to give. Not just to Brianna or my parents or even the university, but to the girls who grew up like I did, always useful, always quiet, always last. I rewrote the introduction. This is not a call for pity. This is a record of what happens when love is measured by usefulness, of what happens when the strong one speaks. I added quotes from my journal entries over the years, notes I'd once scribbled on napkins, receipts, the backs of grocery lists, thoughts I'd buried. Now they had space. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail. No, it was addressed to me, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a card with gold trim. You've always been stronger than all of us. I don't know how to say I'm sorry, but I'm trying. There was no name. I knew it was from Brianna. It wasn't enough. But it was something. A thread. Not to pull me back, but maybe to show she finally saw the rope I'd been using to hold her up all those years. I didn't respond. Instead, I took out a blank card and wrote something for myself. Your voice is not too much. Your needs are not too big. Your story is not too small. I pinned it to the wall above my desk. Later that week, Liam called. Said a podcast producer from the university's alumni network wanted to record a graduation reflection, not just with student speakers, but also those who shaped the year in unexpected ways. They want to talk to you, he said, on mic. Just 10 minutes. I hesitated. I'm not a performer. I told him. You don't have to be, he said. Just tell the truth. You're good at that. The invitation felt different than the seat I never got at graduation. This wasn't about being included in someone else's story. This was mine. I said yes. The day of the recording, I wore the same black sweater I'd worn to the restaurant, the same one I stood in when my mother looked past me. It wasn't luck. It wasn't armor. It was just mine. The producer, a kind woman named Eliza, guided me into a small sound booth. She asked me to introduce myself. I looked at the mic, took a breath, and spoke. My name is Rachel Taylor. I'm a graduate of the education program. And I want to talk about what happens when you build someone else's dream and forget your own. And I did. I spoke clearly, slowly. Just like I'd practiced in my head all those nights, I felt invisible. I didn't talk about bitterness. I didn't point fingers. I just told the truth, the kind that lingers after the applause fades. When I finished, Eliza pressed stop, and there was a long pause. Then she said softly, "You're going to help more people than you know." I smiled, not wide, not for show, just enough to feel it in my chest. Because for the first time, I wasn't speaking to be heard. I was speaking because I mattered. A week passed before I heard from my parents again. It came through a group text titled Family Brunch. This Saturday. No greeting, no explanation, just an address. Time and a note that said, "Let's put the past behind us. We're proud of both our girls. Both our girls." I stared at those words for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't respond. Jordan, watching me from across the living room, raised her eyebrows. "You going?" I sighed. "I don't know." She took a slow sip of coffee. "Do you want to go?" That was the question. Not should, not must, but want. I hadn't seen them since the restaurant. No phone calls, no in-person conversation. Just that one envelope from Brianna. Just that one sentence I'm trying. And now this brunch. Like a curtain being tugged open after a bad show, hoping the audience would forgive the scene change. Still, part of me wanted to go, not to make peace. Exactly. But to see if they meant it, to see if they had even begun to understand what they'd done, not just what they'd missed, but what they'd chosen to ignore. So I replied, "I'll come." But only if it's not a performance. No one answered the message. Saturday morning came. I took my time getting ready. I didn't dress to impress or hide. I wore jeans, a navy sweater, and the necklace I'd bought for myself when I finished my last teaching practicum, something simple, but mine. My hair was pulled back. My expression was even. The brunch was held at my parents' house, the one I hadn't been invited to for nearly a year, not for holidays, not for birthdays, not even when I passed through town. As I pulled into the driveway, I saw balloons tied to the mailbox, a banner hung across the porch. "Congratulations, Brianna and Rachel." The words felt weightless, like something printed last minute by someone who remembered I existed just in time to save face. I stood outside the front door for a full minute before knocking. I didn't want to walk in, not like I used to, not as the helper, the extra hands, the reliable daughter who set tables and smiled through dismissals. When the door opened, it was my dad. "Hey, kid," he said, voice gruff but warm. I nodded. "Hi." He stepped aside. "Come on in." The house looked the same. Beige walls, old family photos, the faint scent of cinnamon air freshener. I walked in slowly, scanning the room like it was a museum of memories I hadn't been part of in a long time. My mom was in the kitchen, arranging fruit on a platter like it was a competition. "There she is." She said when she saw me, "You look good." "Honey, thanks." Brianna appeared from the hallway, wearing a pale pink jumpsuit and holding a gift bag. She looked guarded, not smug, not warm, just unsure. "Hi," she said. "Hi." We stood there, two sisters with decades between us now. Even if the calendar didn't say so. She reached into the bag and handed me a small box. "I know it's late, but congrats." I opened it. Inside was a pen engraved with my name and the words, "Miss Taylor, Educator of the Year." I blinked. It was unexpected, thoughtful, slightly ironic, considering how little credit I'd been given before. But it was also the first thing she'd ever given me that wasn't hand-me-down or half-hearted. "Thanks," I said quietly. She looked relieved, a little embarrassed. "I read the article." She added, "The one Liam wrote, and I listened to the podcast." I said nothing. "I didn't know how much you were carrying." She continued, "I should have said something sooner. A lot of somethings. You didn't want to know." I said, not harshly, just honestly. Her eyes dropped. "I didn't," she admitted, "because if I did, I'd have to look at what I took." That moment, that sentence was the closest thing to truth we'd ever shared. "I'm not angry," I said. "I just can't carry your parts of the story anymore. That's up to you now." She nodded, swallowing hard. We walked into the living room together. The table was set for brunch quiche, muffins, mimosas. I saw a place card with my name. I saw my photo in a frame next to Brianna's on the console table. For once, I wasn't cropped out. It wasn't perfect. It didn't fix everything, but it was something. During the meal, my dad asked about my plans. "You thinking of staying in state for the fellowship?" "Probably." I said, "But I'm applying to one in Oregon, too." "Oregon," my mom repeated, surprised. I nodded. "There's a district out there investing in trauma-informed education. It aligns with what I've lived and what I want to teach." They didn't protest. They didn't guilt me. They just listened. After brunch, I stepped outside for air. The sun was warm, the wind gentle. I sat on the porch swing, watching the shadows shift across the lawn. A few minutes later, my mom joined me. She didn't say anything at first, just rocked gently beside me. "I read your speech," she said eventually. "The one they published." My stomach tightened. "You said you were tired of being useful." I nodded. I didn't understand that line at first. I kept thinking what mother doesn't want her child to be strong, dependable, good. She paused. But then I realized, we only called you those things when it served us, when it meant we didn't have to ask how you were really doing. I looked at her. Her eyes were soft, rimmed with something between guilt and grief. "I'm sorry, Rachel, for the silence, for the assumptions. for letting you become the support beam without checking if you were cracking. I let the wind pass between us before speaking. "Thank you," I said. "That matters. It doesn't fix it, but it matters." We sat there for a while, not fixing anything, just being. And that was enough. Because I wasn't here to return to the past. I wasn't here to be folded back into a family that only now remembered to include me. I was here to witness the shift, to see if they could hold my truth without folding it into something easier. They could. Barely. But they did. And that was more than I ever thought I'd get. As I stood to leave, my mom hugged me, tighter than she had in years. When I pulled away, I didn't say goodbye. I said, "Take care of yourselves." Because for once, I wouldn't be the one doing it. The night after that brunch, I couldn't sleep. I lay on my back, eyes open in the dark, listening to the small creaks of the apartment around me, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a neighbor's dog, the soft whir of traffic. Nothing special, just the usual sounds of life, but something in me felt different. Still, not peaceful exactly, but settled. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't replaying conversations in my head. I wasn't rehearsing what I should have said or predicting what they might do next. I wasn't strategizing how to be useful. I wasn't calculating how much of myself I could give without disappearing. I was just existing. The next morning, I got a voicemail from Eliza, the podcast producer. She sounded energized. "Rachel, your episode's live." And well, we didn't expect this kind of response. You might want to check the comments. People are resonating with it in a big way. I hesitated before opening the app. My stomach turned a little. Some part of me still bracing for attack or judgment or that old familiar feeling of not being enough. But what I found was something else entirely. Hundreds of comments, some short, others paragraphs long. This is the story I never knew how to tell. I'm 67 and I still haven't said these words out loud. Thank you. My sister and I haven't spoken in years. This cracked something open. They weren't just listening. They were seeing me for so long. I'd spoken in shadows. I'd written in the margins of someone else's spotlight, but now I was standing under my own light. No glitter, no filters. Just truth. That afternoon, Liam texted me again. "Dean wants to invite you back for a student-faculty roundtable, end-of-year series, public audience. You'd be part of a reflection panel." Up for it, I stared at the message. Part of me froze. Public, audience, panel. It was one thing to speak into a microphone in a quiet booth. It was another to sit under fluorescent lights in front of faculty, classmates, strangers, to be watched while talking about pain, to be known. But I wasn't afraid. "Not anymore. Yes," I replied. "Tell me when and where." The round table was scheduled for a Wednesday evening, 2 weeks before official graduation dates. It would be held in the university's small auditorium, live-streamed and recorded. The theme, resilience in real life. Unpacking the stories we don't celebrate enough. I was one of 4 speakers. A transfer student who had survived cancer, a former foster youth now heading to law school, a retired veteran completing his degree at 56, and me. Each of us was given 10 minutes to speak, then we'd answer questions. I spent the next few days writing, not memorizing, but sculpting. Honing the words, choosing what to hold close and what to release. On the day of the panel, I wore a dark green dress I'd bought on clearance last year and never had the courage to wear. I tied my hair back, simple and clean, no statement jewelry, no bright lipstick, just me. The auditorium wasn't full, but it was fuller than I expected. Rows of students, professors, local community members. Some had copies of the student paper in their laps, some clutched notebooks, some. I recognized from my own classes people who never looked at me twice before. Brianna wasn't there, but Maya was, Jordan too, and Liam, sitting in the back. Camera slung over his shoulder, gave me a small thumbs up when it was my turn. I walked to the microphone slowly. I didn't grip the podium. I didn't clear my throat or fidget. I just breathed. And then I began. "My name is Rachel Taylor," I said. And for most of my life, I believed being useful was the same as being loved. The room went still. I told my story, not all the details, but the shape of it. How I became the fixer, the background glue, the silent support, how I poured into everyone else's needs and forgot to ask if I had any of my own. How I learned to be reliable at the cost of being real. I didn't name names, I didn't point fingers, I just spoke. And when I got to the part about standing in the back of the auditorium at graduation, I paused. I didn't cry because I was forgotten. I said, I cried because I realized I had helped build something I would never be invited into. Murmurs moved through the crowd, and still, I don't regret helping. What I regret is not naming myself in the story I helped write, so tonight, I'm naming her. I'm Rachel. I was there. I mattered. I finished. Silence hung in the air for a beat too long. Then came the applause, soft at first, then full, rippling, not performative, not explosive, just steady. After the panel, a student approached me. She looked maybe 19. Nervous, fidgety. I'm the oldest of 5, she said. I raised them while my mom works nights. No one knows that. No one ever asked. But when you spoke, I felt seen. I placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You are, I said, later. As I packed up my notes, Eliza caught me backstage. You're not just a guest anymore, she said. You've started something. People are asking for more what workshops, talks, stories like yours. I blinked. I'm just me. She smiled. Exactly. That's why it works. On the walk home, I thought about that, about the ripple effect of a voice once silenced, about how small truth can move big things. I thought about my younger self sitting on the floor with receipts and ramen, wondering if anyone would ever call her name, and now they were listening. But more importantly, so was I. The next week, everything moved faster than I expected. The roundtable clip was shared on the university's alumni network. Then it started popping up on other feeds' education pages, mental health forums, even an online community for siblings of chronically overlooked children. I didn't realize how many of us there were, how many people had stories just like mine, locked behind politeness and being the strong one. A few days later, Liam forwarded me an email from the university's media department. The school was preparing a highlight reel for graduation week. Every year, they selected a few student voices to represent diverse and inspiring journeys. This time, they were asking me to speak, but not as a supporting voice, as the closing voice. I thought they already had someone for that. I replied to Liam, they did. He said, smiling, but after the round table, they changed their mind. I knew what he meant. Brianna had been their first choice. Now they were asking me. I sat with the offer for 2 days. Not because I doubted I could do it, but because I wanted to be sure I was doing it for the right reasons, not to outshine her, not to prove anything to people who only just remembered I existed, but because I had something to say, and I was ready to say it. So I said yes. The taping was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon in the same auditorium where I had once stood in the back, unseen, unscheduled, uninvited. Now I was standing in the spotlight. No borrowed gown, no +1 forgotten at the door. This time, the invitation had my name on it. When I arrived, the stage was lit in soft amber. The crew adjusted microphones, angled cameras, and gave me gentle cues. I waited in the wings, heart steady, not calm, but anchored. Jordan was in the front row, waving, Maya beside her, nodding. Liam gave me a thumbs up from behind a camera lens, and then the producer said, "Rachel, you're on." I walked to the center of the stage, no script in my hand, no notes. I didn't need them anymore. I stood still. I looked into the lights, and I spoke. My name is Rachel Taylor. I'm the daughter of Elaine and George Taylor. I'm the older sister of Brianna, and for most of my life, I lived in the quiet part of the story. I let that sentence settle. I could feel the room breathe. I was the one who showed up, filled in, paid the bills no one talked about, fixed what broke before anyone else noticed it was broken. I was the emotional glue in a house that never stopped leaking. I glanced toward the camera, not afraid of being seen, but intent on being felt. And I learned something about silence. It doesn't mean peace. It doesn't mean humility. Sometimes, it just means nobody asked. And sometimes, we forget we're even allowed to answer. I took one step forward this year. I found my voice, not by yelling, not by demanding applause, but by telling the truth. Another breath. I wasn't thanked in the speech. I wasn't listed on the seating chart. I wasn't in the photos. But I was there. Every late night, every exam week, every crisis, I was there. And today, I get to say my name out loud, not to be rescued, but to be remembered. I paused, then softened. If you've ever been the quiet one, the helper, the extra name no one mentions, you're not alone. You deserve more than usefulness. You deserve space. You deserve recognition. You deserve to rest without guilt. I let my final words land slowly. This is my graduation, too. Not from school, from silence. The room held stillness like reverence. Then the crew gave the signal cut, and I exhaled. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I didn't rush off stage. I stood there, letting the echo of my own words wash over me. For the first time, my truth wasn't something I had to fight to keep. It was something I had given freely, and no one could take it back. After the taping, the producer approached me. "You're going to help more students than any policy we could write," she said. "You just rewrote the meaning of strength." That night, the video was uploaded to the university's social page. By morning, it had tens of thousands of views, not viral in the flashy sense, but viral in the way that matters quiet shares between sisters. Texts from estranged parents, Facebook posts captioned. This hit me harder than I expected. Even Brianna posted it. No filter, no edit, just a link, and one line. She was always the strong one. I just didn't see it. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because this wasn't about her anymore. This was about the girl I used to be, the one standing at the back of the room, waiting for someone to hand her a mic. This was for the woman I'd become, the one who built her own. 2 days later, the dean's office contacted me. They were organizing a new student speaker segment, Letters to Our Younger Selves. They wanted to close the academic year with something reflective, honest, human. "Would you be willing to write one?" they asked. "It can be anonymous, or not." I smiled. "I'll write it, and I'll sign it." They gave me 5 minutes. I needed less than 3. And when I took the stage again, this time to read what I had written, I didn't think of the past. I thought of the future, the teacher I would become, the students I would love, the quiet ones I would see. And I began, "Dear younger me, you did everything they asked, and more, and they still forgot to thank you. That's not your fault. You are not invisible. You are not a tool. You are not the backup plan. You are the author. You get to choose where the story goes next. Love, the version of you who finally remembered her own name." When I looked up, there were tears in the room. Mine, too. Not out of pain, out of release. Because I wasn't standing in someone else's story anymore. This one was mine. A few weeks later, I packed my bags and left the apartment, not in a rush, not in anger. Just ready. It was quiet that morning. Jordan had already moved out for her new job in Boston. Brianna was gone too off on some influencer retreat in Arizona. She hadn't said goodbye. She didn't need to. That part of our story didn't need more words. We had reached a kind of understanding, fragile, imperfect, but real. I left behind the couch we'd shared, the chipped coffee mugs, the crooked bookshelf that leaned like it was always tired. I took only what was mine. No mementos, no just-in-case things. I left the apartment like I was shedding an old skin, because I wasn't who I used to be anymore. My new place was small, a studio just outside the city, close to the school where I'd been hired to teach that fall. It wasn't fancy. The kitchen was barely wide enough for 2 people, and the shower handle creaked when I turned it. But it was mine, every inch of it. Paid for with my name on the lease, my job, my life. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty for claiming space. I spent the first few days rearranging furniture, lighting candles, putting up little reminders of who I was becoming, not who I had been, who I was now. On the fridge, I taped a photo of my round table panel. On my nightstand, I framed a handwritten note from one of my former students. Ms. Taylor made me feel smart. Simple words, but they meant everything. My days slowed down. I took walks without needing a destination. I spent time in bookstores, reading just because I wanted to. I cooked for myself not fast meals thrown together in exhaustion, but real food, real care. I began journaling again, not just to process pain, but to celebrate peace. Sometimes, I still heard echoes of old habits, the instinct to offer more than I had, the reflex to say yes when I meant no, but now, I caught it sooner. I paused. I asked myself, do I really want to do this? Is it mine to carry? And more often than not, the answer was no. That clarity didn't come from bitterness. It came from boundaries, and those boundaries didn't make me hard. They made me whole. One Saturday afternoon, I received an email from Harper, a fellow teacher I'd met during my practicum. She was organizing a local youth workshop series on self-worth and voice for high school girls. We'd love for you to lead one of the sessions. You don't have to prepare anything formal. Just tell your story, however you want. I stared at the screen, heart beating a little faster. I thought about the girl I'd been at 17, working weekends, missing prom, watching Brianna twirl in new dresses while I altered hand-me-downs. If someone like me had stood in front of that version of myself and said, "You don't have to disappear to be loved," I wonder how many years I could have saved. I replied, "I'm in. Just tell me when." A week later, I stood in front of a classroom of 15 teenage girls, some slouched in their chairs, others upright with pens in hand. A few looked guarded. One chewed on her hoodie string, another had headphones half dangling from her ear. I introduced myself, told them I was a teacher. Yes, but more importantly, a survivor of silence. I didn't give them a lecture. I gave them pieces of myself. The moments I stayed quiet when I should have spoken, the times I gave too much, the day I stood in the back of my own graduation. And then I said, but this isn't about sadness. This is about naming yourself before someone else does, at the end of the hour. We did a writing exercise. I asked them to write a letter to a version of themselves they had once tried to ignore. When we finished, one of the girls, Celeste, barely 15, stayed behind. She handed me her letter, said nothing, just walked away. I unfolded it. 3 short lines. I know you were trying. I see you now. You don't have to earn love. I sat in my car for a long time after that, letting the weight of her words settle. Not because they were heavy, but because they were true. And someone that young had found the courage to write them down. We were healing, all of us. Later that week, I received a voicemail from my father. "Hey, Rach, just wanted to say we watched your clip from the round table again. Your mom cried. I'm proud of you. Not just for what you've done, but for how you did it. Hope we can talk soon." I didn't know what to do with that message. I didn't call back right away, not because I was angry, but because I was still learning that I didn't owe my energy, just because someone finally decided to show up. That was a new kind of freedom, knowing I could take my time, that I didn't have to rush toward reconciliation just because it was offered. One night, I lit a candle and opened a fresh journal. On the first page, I wrote one sentence, "I am not a background character in someone else's spotlight," and beneath that, I added, "I don't need to be loud to be heard. I just need to be honest." It wasn't about being famous, or followed, or featured. It was about finally living in the truth of who I was, not the sister, not the fixer, not the backup plan. Just Rachel. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. 1 year later, I returned to the university, not because I had to, because I wanted to. It was spring again, almost exactly 12 months since the day I stood at the back of that auditorium with my name missing from the program and my chair unassigned. I remembered how I had gripped the railing, watching Brianna thank the world while I melted into the shadows, how my throat had closed with everything I couldn't say. But this time, I walked onto campus without weight, without needing to prove anything. I had been invited to speak at a community workshop series for first-gen students, young people navigating college, family, identity, often all at once. The director said, "Your voice stayed with a lot of people last year. We'd love for you to close out the season." I smiled when she said that, not because it felt glamorous, but because it felt earned. On the morning of the event, I arrived early. I walked the campus slowly, stopping by old benches, familiar stairwells, the small corner of the library where I used to tutor other students after double shifts. I passed a bulletin board near the student center. Someone had posted a printout of one of my quotes, "You don't have to disappear to be loved." I didn't know who put it there. I just knew I wasn't invisible anymore. The workshop was held in a small auditorium, not the grand stage, but something more intimate. Rows of chairs, natural light pouring in, folding tables set up with coffee and granola bars. The kind of space where people come not to be impressed, but to be understood. My session was the final one of the day, owning your narrative, speaking without apology. I began like I always did, not with a bio, not with achievements, but with a moment. I used to think that being the strong one meant staying quiet, that if I could hold everything together without asking for help, then maybe, just maybe someone would see me. The students nodded. Some looked down at their notebooks. Others didn't blink. But silence isn't strength. It's survival. And survival isn't the same as living. I shared my story again, but now with more distance. Not like an open wound, like a scar I'd stopped hiding. I told them about the speech, the brunch, the receipts, about how I once measured my worth and how well I could hold up everyone else's life, and how that weight almost made me forget I had a life of my own. After the talk, students came up one by one. Some just said thank you. Some asked for hugs. One girl handed me a letter she'd written during the journaling activity. I tucked it carefully into my bag. Later that evening, as I waited for my train, I opened the letter. It read, "You reminded me that I don't have to earn rest. That being tired isn't a failure. It's a sign I've been carrying too much alone." I folded the note slowly and held it in my hands for a long while, letting the words settle into me like warmth, because this was never about fame or validation or finally getting the applause. This was about naming the pain and choosing not to let it define me anymore. A few weeks later, I got an email from Brianna. It had been months since we'd spoken. The message was short. "Hey, I'm back in town for a bit. If you're open to it, I'd like to meet." No pressure, just coffee, no cameras, no speeches. I sat with it for a while. I didn't feel resentment anymore, but I also didn't feel urgency. I'd stopped chasing closure from people who only offered it on their schedule. But something in her tone felt different this time, so I agreed. We met at a quiet coffee shop near where she used to film her day in the life vlogs. No ring light, no perfect angles. Just two sisters sitting across from each other, unfiltered. She looked tired, softer, like she had been walking through her own reckoning. "I watched your talk," she said, again. I nodded. I figured, "I've been thinking a lot." She continued, about what I inherited and what I stole without asking. She looked me in the eye. "I can't change the past, but I'm not going to pretend I didn't take advantage of your silence." I breathed slowly. "I appreciate that." I said, "But this can't just be a moment of guilt. It has to be followed by change." "I know," she said. "I'm working on it." We sat there for almost an hour, talking not like best friends, but like two women unraveling what years of imbalance had tangled. We didn't solve everything, but we didn't need to. Before we parted, she reached into her bag. "I made something." She said, "You can throw it away if you want. I just needed to make it." She handed me a framed print. Inside was a photo of us as kids, sitting on the porch, our feet dirty, ice cream smeared on our shirts. Below it, a quote, "She was never just my sister. She was the reason I made it at all." I didn't cry. I just said, "Thank you." And I meant it. That night, I placed the frame on a shelf not as a symbol of forgiveness, but of evolution. We weren't who we once were, and maybe that was okay. The next morning, I went to my classroom early. I opened the blinds, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat at my desk. The room was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that meant erasure, the kind of quiet that meant peace. On my board, I had written a new message for my students that week. It said, "You do not have to shrink to make others comfortable. You do not have to disappear to be loved. Your story matters. So do you." I looked around the empty classroom, smiled, and whispered to myself I was never the ghost. I was the foundation, and now I'm the one writing the future. And with that, I turned on the lights and began again.